Thank you for that introduction. Tonight, this evening, I'd like to call your attention to attention. I think the moment I knew we were in trouble was a while back before I started writing the book, Focus. I was on my way to a meeting. I was driving. I was late, but I was wanting people there to know I was coming. So as I was driving, I was texting them on my way. That's rather horrible because it turns out, as I read not very long after that, that texting while driving is the same as drinking while driving. Another thing I've noticed is when I was writing the book, I'd be kind of on a riff, really in flow, writing well, then I'd have to look something up. So I go to Google Scholar. I love Google Scholar because it gives you access to the academic database. So I open my web browser, and my web browser presents me with the news of the day. And I'm a news junkie. So all of a sudden, I start reading news stories, and before I know it, I've been lost. 15, 20 minutes has gone by before I realized that, oh, I was supposed to be looking that up. And today, we're all in the same boat, in that the tools that we use, our computer, our phone, and so on, are also devised to interrupt us, to seduce us, to draw our attention from this to that. And usually under that is trying to sell us something, a pop-up ad or whatever. To us. In 2007, Time magazine, a major American publication, had a small article that said there's a new word in the English language. The word is pizzled. It's a combination of puzzled and pissed off. And it refers to the moment when you're with someone who takes out their BlackBerry and starts talking to someone else and ignoring you. In 2007, that was unusual. But the word pizzled has died with the BlackBerry because now that's the new social norm. You go out to a dinner, very romantic restaurant, you see a couple together, and they're both looking at their phones instead of into each other's eyes. Something has happened to us. In 1977, Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon wrote, very prescient, he said, "Information consumes attention. Hence, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention." I think we've entered a time when we're in danger of attentional impoverishment. The ingredients of rapport are three. The first is full mutual attention. From that full attention comes a second ingredient. It's a nonverbal synchrony. If you look at two people who are really in rapport, really connecting, if you were to make a video of that and watch it in silence, the two bodies look as though they're choreographed. This is something that's managed by a category of brain cell called oscillators. Oscillators govern how we respond to someone else, how we respond to physical objects. Oscillators are very important for the survival of the human species. Consider this. At the moment of a first kiss, they determine the velocity at which two skulls come together. And if they get it wrong, it would be the end of the species, I'm sure. The third ingredient, after the full attention and the nonverbal synchrony, is that it feels good. It's a rather pleasant, joyous state to connect with someone that well. These are the moments in our lives that are the richest, that really matter. However, recently there was an article in the Harvard Business Review called "The Human Moment." It said, if you want to have real connection with someone, and if they come into your office, remember this: turn away from your screen, ignore your phone and every other device, stop your daydream or whatever's on your mind, and pay full attention to the person in front of you. Because attention is a rarer and rarer commodity, but it's a very precious commodity. There's not just one kind of attention, there's several varieties. The most obvious is selective attention, when we focus on one thing and ignore others. There are two main kinds of distractors, two general classes. One is sensory distractors. So if you're looking at me, you're probably not noticing this whiteboard here, right? That's relatively easy. The tough one is the second category. It's emotional distractors. Our emotional distractors are extremely powerful. They're thoughts about that conversation that didn't go so well, the tiff I had with my partner this morning, mostly relationship concerns, things that have upset us. So the more focused we are, the better we do at anything. It's rather obvious, but for example, a test of concentration among athletes predicts how well they'll do the next season. That's rather straightforward. And the less our mind wanders, or students' mind wander reading a text, the better we comprehend the text. However, it turns out, on average, while we're reading a book, our mind wanders about 20 to 40% of the time. But the point is that the more disrupted attention is, particularly for young people, the harder it is for them to grasp, to build the cumulative mental models that amount to mastery in any subject. So this is generally the relationship between performance. Say this is high, this is low. And this is the horizontal line is brain activity, particularly levels of stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline. And the relationship is very telling. It goes like this. It's an upside down U. And the highest performance is when attention is absolutely 100%, maybe 110%. It's been called flow. Flow was discovered, for those of you who don't know about it, by researchers who asked people in many different domains of expertise, basketball players, ballerinas, neurosurgeons, tell us about a time you outdid yourself. You were absolutely at your best. Even you were surprised. And no matter what the domain was, people were describing the same phenomenological state. And one of the characteristics of the state is that attention is utterly absorbed. There was a neurosurgeon who said, I had to do a surgery, an operation that I didn't really know if I could. It was so difficult. But I did it superbly. I was really surprised myself. At the end of the surgery, I looked around and I saw some rubble in the corner of the operating theater. I said, "What happened?" They said, "While you were operating, the roof caved in over there, and you didn't notice." It's that kind of attention. It's unbreakable. It's also a state where your skills are called upon at the utmost, and whatever the demand is, you can meet it. You're very flexible, very adaptable. And very tellingly, it's a state that feels good. It's like rapport. Rapport is mutual flow, interpersonal flow. So that's when focus is 100%. When you have too much to do, too little time, too little support, when you feel overwhelmed, you're down here. And the stress hormones are at their highest. You're in a state which was called recently in a scientific journal, actually the journal Science, in an article was called The Neurobiology of Frazzle. I don't know if you're familiar with frazzle. I've been there many times. It's constant stress. And here the problem is you can't stop thinking about what's upsetting you, what's stressing you. You're not focusing here. You're not focusing on the task at hand. You're focusing on what's upsetting you, and that's the power of emotions. Emotions take over attention. They guide attention, and if they're too strong, then you'll never get up here. Over here, performance is low because people are undermotivated, disengaged. This is a huge problem, disengagement in the workplace. People feel, in fact, there was a survey. This is really interesting. It was done at Harvard. 2,500 people are given an iPhone app, and the app rings them at random times during the day, and they answer two questions. What are you doing now? And what are you thinking about now? And the discrepancy, of course, is a measure of mind wandering. Turns out 50% of the time, on average, our minds are wandering. The one activity that had the highest focus, no surprise, was making love. But who fills out that app at a time like that? I still haven't been able to figure that out. The lowest three were commuting, sitting at a computer, and work. That's this. So if you're not engaged in what you're doing, your cortisol levels are too low. So I've been talking about focusing as though it were the only valuable kind of attention. But actually, mind wandering, which is the enemy of focusing, the term they use in brain science is they are anti-correlated. If your mind is wandering, by definition, you're not focusing, and vice versa. Mind wandering is absolutely essential for creative insight. The creative process demands that, first of all, you gather information, you focus on the problem, you really concentrate, and then you let go. The annals of science and mathematics are full of people who came up with incredible solutions when they were just daydreaming, in the shower, getting on a bus, walking your dog. And that's because during mind wandering, we're able to make connections between remote elements in a new way that has value. That's the definition of a creative act. Of course, if you're going to execute, if you're going to put the idea to use, then you have to go back into focus. But mind wandering is extremely valuable. There's another level at which attention operates. This has to do with leadership. I argue that leaders need three kinds of focus to be really effective. The first is an inner focus. When we're making a decision, any decision, when to have the next appointment, should I leave my job for another one? What strategy should we follow going into the future? Should I marry this fellow compared to all the other fellows I married? Those are decisions that require we draw on our entire life experience. And the circuitry that collects that life experience is very base brain. It's very ancient in the brain. And it has no direct connection to the part of the brain that thinks in words. It has very rich connectivity to the gastrointestinal tract, to the gut. So we get a gut feeling. Feels right, doesn't feel right. And this inner sense is ethical. It's an ethical rudder. You know, it answers the question, is what I'm about to do in keeping with my sense of meaning, values, purpose, and ethics? That's not a question that we answer first in words. We answer it first in what feels right and doesn't feel right. Then we put it into words. And every leader today needs a strong ethical rudder. So I'd say an inner awareness, inner focus is essential. Then there's other focus, which is being able to read people, being able to tune in to a person. There are three kinds of empathy, and this is empathy I'm talking about. The first is cognitive. Cognitive empathy means I understand how you think about things, your mental models, how you see the world. What that means is I'm able to communicate with you in terms you really understand, you really resonate with. Managers, leaders who are able to talk to other people with good cognitive empathy are able to get better than expected performance out of people because they know how to mobilize them. They know what matters. Then there's emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is an immediate felt sense of what's going on in the other person. And this is absolutely essential too. If you only have cognitive empathy and you don't have emotional empathy, you'll miss the mark. The third kind of empathy is very important too. It's empathic concern. Not only do I know how you think and how you feel, but if there's something you need and I can help you with, I'm predisposed to help. The leaders who have the most loyalty, who people love working for, have all three kinds of empathy. The third kind of focus is outer focus. This is very important, for example, in formulating strategy. You need to understand the ecosystem within which your organization operates. You need to be able to sense what's going to work, what we'll need to do in the future, and so on. And for that, you need a kind of systems view, big picture thinking. If you don't have an inner focus and an other focus and an outer focus, the danger is being rudderless, clueless, or blindsided. Attention is a mental muscle. It's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and you lift weights, every time you do a repetition, you strengthen the muscle that you're working. Attention can be strengthened in the same way. All you have to do is sit straight up. Close your eyes and bring your attention to your breath. Don't try to control your breath. Just watch your breath. Observe it. Try to sense it coming in and out, maybe your nostrils. And watch every breath, the full in-breath, the full out-breath. Start over again with the next breath. Did anybody notice their mind wandering? Did anybody bring it back? That's the rep. Actually, the exercise is not keeping your mind focused. The exercise is when it wanders, bringing it back. That's what strengthens the connectivity in the attentional circuitry. And what's interesting to me is that we don't exercise it, typically. We depend on externals to grab our attention. In fact, our economy, in a sense, is built on the grabbing of attention. Habituation is what the brain does when it sees the same old thing day after day after day, walking the same way to work or whatever it is. You don't see it after a while. The brain economizes on attention. Orienting, on the other hand, is opening up. It's whenever the brain encounters something new, novel, and surprising, it excites the brain. And Richard Davidson, who's a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin, has expertise in the brain and emotion. And he's found in his research that when we're agitated, when we're upset and angry and anxious, there's a lot of activity in the right prefrontal area, just behind the forehead. Also in the amygdala, the brain's trigger point for the fight, flight, freeze response. When we're, on the other hand, in a really positive state, I feel great, enthusiastic, what a wonderful day, there's a lot of activity on the left side and no activity on the right. Each of us has a ratio at rest of right to left activity that predicts our mood range day to day. He finds there's a bell curve for this, like for IQ. Most of us are in the middle. We have bad days, we have good days. If you're very far to the right, you may be clinically depressed or clinically anxious. If you're very far to the left, you're very resilient. You bounce right back from setbacks. So Davidson paired up with a fellow named John Kabat-Zinn, who has made mindfulness, as he calls it, very popular, for example, in the medical sector as a way to manage chronic conditions. And also, in the States, at least in business recently, a lot of businesses are bringing it in. And it's more or less what we just did. Davidson and Kabat-Zinn went to a biotech startup, a 24/7, high-pressure environment, and they taught people how to do mindfulness, which is more or less the exercise of watching the breath. But they did it 30 minutes a day for 8 weeks. What he found was that before that, people's brains were tilted to the right. They're pretty hassled and stressed. After 8 weeks, 30 minutes a day, they were tilting back toward the left. And what's very interesting is people spontaneously started saying, hey, I'm starting to enjoy my work again. I remember what I love about this job. In other words, the positive mood was really making a difference. The reason I'm worried about children is that the brain is the last organ of the body to become anatomically mature. It starts growing from birth, and it actually doesn't finish until the mid-20s. During that time, the principle of neuroplasticity is extremely important. Neuroplasticity says that repeated experiences shape the brain. Use it or lose it is another way of saying it. If a child has an experience, for example, of empathy and another experience of empathy, the circuitry for empathy grows. If a child has the experience of paying full attention and ignoring distractors, which is what we just did, the connectivity for that circuitry grows. And children need this in order for their brains to develop well. When we see a child grow and go through different phases of childhood, what we're seeing are the external signs of brain growth. And I think it's incumbent on us to help children shape their brains in the best way. Think before you act is a very valuable lesson because it says you can't determine what emotions you're going to have. Our emotions come unbidden. But once you have them, you can stop and think what you're going to do. In fact, one definition of maturity is lengthening the gap between impulse and action. This is a lesson in what's called cognitive control. Some of you may know about the marshmallow test. It's a rather legendary study in psychology. 4-year-olds at Stanford University are brought into a room one by one, sat down at a small table, big juicy marshmallow put in front of them. The experimenter says to this 4-year-old, "You can have the marshmallow now if you want, but if you don't eat it till I come back from running an errand, you can have 2 then." Then she leaves the room. This is a predicament that tries the soul of any 4-year-old, I assure you. I've seen video on it. Some of them will go up and sniff it as though it were dangerous and then jump back, and others go off and sing and dance to themselves in a corner to stay distracted. About a third of the kids can't stand it. They just grab it and gobble it down on the spot. And another third or so wait the endless 10, 12 minutes until the experimenter comes back and they get the 2 marshmallows. The payoff from the study came 14 years later, when they're tracked down as they're about to go to university, and the 2 groups are compared, the ones who gobbled, the ones who waited. And it turns out the ones who waited get along much better with their peers. They're still able to delay gratification in pursuit of their goals, which is exactly what that's a test of. And this was a surprise. On the American University Entrance Exam, the SAT, which at that time had 1,600 total points, the kids who waited had a 210-point advantage over the kids who grabbed. This is really interesting because these are all children of parents at Stanford University. These are high IQ, high-achieving families. So what's going on? The difference seems to be that if you're not able to manage your impulse, and mind wandering is kind of a microcosm of that, then you're going to be more upset, you're going to be more emotional, you're not going to be able to pay attention to what the teacher is saying, so you can't learn as well. So it's, the lessons in attention, in emotional intelligence start very, very early in life. But I think we've got to get better at it. So let me finish with, by telling you about a smart use of positive emotion, of being able to manage our own internal world, of that inner focus. There is a remarkable man named Matthew Ricard. He's written some books on happiness. He's French. He has a doctorate in cell biology from Pasteur Institute. His mentor there actually won a Nobel Prize for the research they're doing. But after graduate school, he made a startling decision. He decided he'd give up science and go to the Himalayas, become a monk, and meditate for the rest of his life. He's been called, I think by his publisher's publicist, the happiest man in the world, because he's been studied by scientists, and on this right-to-left ratio, he's very far to the left. So our emotions are contagious, for better or for worse, particularly when we pay full attention to each other. I once was waiting for a bus on a very hot, humid day in New York City in August. It's the kind of day, I don't know about London, but in New York we have a rather invisible balloon around us. We're feeling a little prickly. It says, "Don't talk to me, don't touch me." And I had my balloon intact, and the bus pulls up, get on with my balloon, and the bus driver did something quite surprising. He actually spoke to me. He said, "How's your day been?" I was shocked, but I sat down, taking most of my bubble with me. And then I realized this bus driver is carrying on a conversation with everyone on the bus. You're looking for suits, are you? You know, there's a great sale over here on the right in this department store. And did you hear about the Monet exhibit on the left at the museum? Wonderful. And the Cineplex we're coming to here. I know the movie in Cinema 4 got the best reviews, but the one in Cinema 2, I saw it the other night, fantastic. You should. On and on like that. And then people would get off the bus and he'd say to them, I hope the rest of your day is really wonderful. That man was an urban saint. He transformed everyone on the bus. He was sending ripples of good feeling through a city that sorely needed it. And I think the bottom line is, you know, you don't have to go to the Himalayas for decades. We all can do that in our lives if we pay attention. Thank you very much.